how do you pre-process data and set up data for it to be usable to the LLM in an efficient way without completely hampering its creative capacity to find patterns and do things that you haven't thought of already when you set up the data structure.
I'm frustrated that Google hasn't actually enabled chat within Google Analytics yet. It's technically feasible. I suspect the delays might be as much about cost as it is about kind of complexity to get the right answer. But I do believe that, to what you said, absolutely, the barrier is often that the data's there, but actually you'd have to ask a lot of sort of pre-processing type questions. Set up this first, then set up this, and then you can answer my question.
Yeah.
Or perhaps another way of saying it, you'd have to set a lot of context about what are all these data points about and what do they mean before AI can understand. Welcome to another episode of Littledata's podcast. I'm here today with Colyn from Tempo.
Thanks for having me.
Colyn, we've known each other for a while, and you've been in the e-com space for a bit, and you had a previous company also helping brands develop native apps.
Yep.
Tell us about the genesis of Tempo and kind of what you're trying to do.
Sure, yeah. We've been working on Tempo for a little over a year, iterating on what we can do with the latest capabilities with LLMs. The premise from the beginning has been that we should be building a system where we maximize context into the platform, and that's going to enable us to do interesting things, valuable things from a content generation standpoint. And so we've been experimenting with what we can do in email, in ads, in photography, and we're really zeroing in now on the use case of helping brands create more ads, in particular for Meta, on that premise of having as much context as possible on the brand.
Interesting. So the premise, so you say the platform being Meta, and the premise being that basically the more different creative Meta has to work with, the more likely it is to find a sort of winning concept.
Right. That's right. And that there would be value in being connected to Meta, to Shopify, to Klaviyo, having all of the creative context of what the brand is actually running, how those things are performing, as well as the product catalog and sales data and inventory data, and that would allow us to automate creative workflows in close conjunction with human inputs, of course, but automate the creation of assets in a way that's going to be interesting and performant over time.
So obviously one of the classic problems with this AI creative is technically the local maxima problem. Like, you make something that's incrementally better than an idea that's already there, but it's not actually like a truly creative solution. You're not actually coming up with a new angle or new brand. How do you think you can solve that with your product?
I think we can help people solve it. And what I mean by that is we're enabling, to share a bit more on what we're doing. We're enabling brands and we're helping them create these workflows that can automatically pull in different things. So that could be ads that are performing right now. It could be inspiration from competitors. It could be the fact that new products are added to catalog, and we're marrying that with structured experiments, essentially, within our platform that can keep certain variables constant, explore new areas, and we can string these different nodes together, because that's essentially what this is behind the scenes. It's like a node builder. We can string these nodes together in workflows and run them and get different outputs. And then we can think about, well, one is humans evaluating those. The other thing we can look at is building out AI evaluations of, well, how different is this really? Does this align perhaps with different personas? There's different things we will be able to do off of the back of that we're exploring right now. But I think it's getting those creative juices flowing, getting that volume of potential concepts to react to, but having them be grounded in data and understanding of what's worked and what is actually different, right? Versus just variations on the same, as you said.
Yeah, this is quite interesting. So you can actually basically get AI to assess whether the video is like a totally different story or angle versus just a different look.
I think we definitely can do that. The systems are getting really good at those sorts of assessments of what's going on. And there's different ways you can approach it, and whether the different rubrics you could use in terms of, well, what are the traits that go into it? I think one question is, for us to figure out is going to be, does that need to look very different for one brand versus another, or is there sort of a universal system you can kind of build out that enables an LLM to score things on these different parameters? That's all going to be part of the journey, I think, over the coming years for brands building these creative systems.
And the obvious questions, we work with a lot of performance marketing agencies, is where does it leave the agency? Is this a tool that agency might use with brand, or do you see it more like you're assisting in-house sort of marketing managers do more without hiring a big team?
Yeah, I think we're going to learn that over time. I do think there's an element where the role of the agency might evolve.
Yeah.
But we see, and our own model has evolved a bit in response to this as we've been beta testing different versions of this, but we see that brands need support in setting these systems up. And so there's a role for that. And some brands are staffed up to do it entirely internally, but many need more help. And that could be help that comes from the vendor like ourselves. It could be help that comes from an agency or a contractor. So I think there's always going to be that need for expertise and perspective that somebody brings. And I think we're going to figure out what the right model is over the coming years. A lot of people are talking about Sean's, software-enabled agencies right now. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, right? We see, I don't know if you see it in your own business, but agencies are able to build more software than they were able to before, or at least build LLM-driven systems with different tools. And then we have tech companies that need to service their clients more perhaps than they would have a few years ago to stay ahead of the competition, candidly. I don't know if that's...
I actually have quite strong views about this, Sean. I just think that running agency and running a SaaS business is a very, very different business model. It takes a very different culture, people. I know because Littledata was an agency that basically evolved into we were effectively an analytics agency that evolved into a SaaS company. And so I actually think it's utter rubbish that you merge the two. I think you absolutely need to partner. So, I mean, I think our model is not similar to what you're articulating, where, we want to enable agencies to move out of the quagmire of like, why don't the numbers match? And I don't trust the reporting, or, I don't think I'm getting good signal into my ad platforms, and move into the strategic space of like, okay, but what kind of, campaign should we be setting up? Now we know the measurement is right, what calls can we make about what to ramp up and what to wind down. So I just think, yes, AI does enable agencies to spin up. Yeah, I mean, it's quite a good phrase you had there. So LLM-driven systems, or kind of workflows. Yeah, like agreed. That. But I think when it comes to actually producing robust software of the kind that you and I think in the business are making, I don't think agencies are set up to do that. I don't think they have the right people structure and cost structure to do so. And so I actually just generally don't think you get a merge of the companies necessarily. But you definitely get more symbiosis. Yeah. And what's certainly true in agency world is that you need this differentiated edge. So, like, the I do believe this, that Mad Men era of your differentiation being your sort of creatives who can come in and come up with these crazy zany ideas, having had a night on Class A's. that's going, or maybe even gone, and replaced by much more. I mean, actually, I just thinking it through now, the people I know who work in advertising are actually quite numbers driven, rational. It has happened already, right? They're the strategists and the accountants, not the kind of mavericks.
But maybe the pendulum will swing, right?
Maybe.
Where if everyone has a great foundation from a number standpoint, maybe the alpha in the process and in the numbers erodes, and you need to go back to taking really bold swings that are unexpected. Yeah. And so let's see.
I think there's something, I mean, I've heard this argument's made of AI quite a lot recently that it's not true creative. It's very good at sort of coming out with lots of permutations of stuff that's there. And I think that's actually very good for the creative process, because they can often, when we think about sort of divergent thinking, can often come up with a much broader set of like starting points than you might do. But I think there's still a role for this subjective, like, That would be cool if we could come out with that idea. That sort of thing, like human brains still able to make these sort of leaps that I think AI is too well trained, one might say, to make.
And I think that's totally true. And we think about that in terms of product design and what we're doing, where, okay, there's some processes, some workflows you want to just be running, right? And then you want to be able to jump in and, okay, but what if we connect this to this and think about it in this way? Or ask AI to think about it in 50 different ways. And rather than the beauty of what we can do today is, rather than that living in a spreadsheet and just in text, and it's hard sometimes to really picture, well, is that going to work or not? Get all the way to outputs. Maybe you're going to change something.
It's not polished, but
at least you're seeing it 98% of the way there, and you can really get that then human like gut reaction of, okay, I want to run that. I have a feeling that that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, I do think that sort of having the options out there is a hugely beneficial part of AI for the creative process. I'm just thinking about just internally how we're using ChatGPT at the moment to kind of even do the hook writing for my LinkedIn content.
Yeah.
And the most useful thing has not been saying, hey, rewrite this in a compelling way. It's basically been coming up with what are the 5 different ways you could angle this.
Yeah.
And then even then, I won't typically pick one. I'll think, oh, that's a great phrase, but if we combine it with that and change this word, did you say, to your point about 98% of the way there, then my creative brain is thinking about the best way to combine these.
Yeah.
What I've got in my place is all of the sort of ways we could be doing it.
Totally.
Yeah, it's super interesting. It comes to the next question, which is, there are obviously lots of brands experimenting with AI at the moment, and you feel like, obviously there is no right way. Lots of people are finding things that don't work as much as things that do.
Yeah.
What do you see some of the kind of classic mistakes people are making in terms of, their approach to AI or harnessing it for creativity?
Yeah, it's such a tricky question because it has been evolving so quickly. I mean, even for ourselves, building products on top of these LLMs, a lot of the problems we were struggling with solving over 6 months ago are now solved problems, right? And so it's this evolution. I think the one thing that's really difficult, increasingly difficult to do, is to overestimate what is possible with AI. Now, finding the right path to get what you want is where I think a lot of the nuance lives. But it's a lot of things are probably doable, and more things become achievable every, I was going to say month, but every week it seems like today.
Yes.
That being said, not that long ago, just getting really, really high fidelity visual output was still hard. Like until Nano Banana Pro, late November, we were just still running into these issues with packaging fidelity, product fidelity. And there were the workflows to get around those things were onerous, and there were some other tools that could do it. And so
fidelity is in the AI would sort of make it up.
Exactly. Exactly.
So it didn't actually look.
And that's the reason why, actually, yes, there's early adopters on Twitter being very loud about having these end-to-end workflows for marketing that use AI, but most people that we've spoken with, we're still using it for that ideation phase.
Yeah.
And getting it through all the way to the creation of finished assets phase it was not mainstream in 2025. And I think that's what's going to shift in 2026. Going back to what mistakes and challenges, I think one of the key things is, how do you get what you want out of the machine, right? Like the machine can probably do it, but how do you do that, right? Is it about crafting the best possible prompt, or is it about reference images, or is it about synthesizing a bunch of references and using that synthesis as an input? There's different ways of approaching these problems of getting what you want. Different LLMs reward different approaches. And so I think it's evolving, right? But I think I think for some brands, and even for ourselves in our own workflows, what we found sometimes is you might try really hard on getting a prompt just right, and actually, okay, well, actually just using a reference and so what's the system by which you get references in at scale? Solving problems like that and thinking about the different ways of doing things is important. I think something similar exists, a similar challenge on the data side of like, how do you pre-process data and set up data for it to be usable to the LLM in an efficient way?
Yeah.
Without completely hampering its creative capacity to find patterns and do things that you haven't thought of already when you set up the data structure. Does that make sense?
No, it makes total sense. Something I'm thinking a lot about at the moment, because I think Littledata's vision is really about making the data available in a useful way to the algorithms, whether that's internally to Meta's own sort of algorithm to figure out what creative to reward and to allocate budget to, but also I think increasingly for people to like effectively bring their own model to their own data set and say to ask questions.
Right.
One of the products I'm personally working on at the moment as a side project is to sort of using Google Analytics MCP to be able to have as a layer on top of that. Because I'm frustrated that Google hasn't actually enabled chat within Google Analytics yet. It's technically feasible. I suspect the delays might be as much about cost as it is about kind of complexity to get the right answer. But
Interesting.
I do believe that, to what you said, absolutely, the barrier is often that the data's there, but actually you'd have to ask a lot of sort of pre-processing type questions, set up this first, then set up this support, and then you can answer my question.
Yeah.
Or perhaps another way of saying it, you'd have to set a lot of context about what are all these data points about and what do they mean before AI can understand. And so I think one of the really useful things that Littledata can evolve into is effectively this sort of, the data layer is our slogan, but part of that we see as being this intermediary processing between like raw event stream and useful output. So in marketing measurement terms, one of the very basic things is like, I want to be able to link this all into an attributed sort of journey.
Yeah.
The individual touch points are useful, so I need to know that this sale was linked to these previous sort of ad views or so on. And weirdly, if you go and look at Google's own data model with it that it exports to BigQuery via Google Analytics, it's utter garbage. Like it's that you have to do so much work to get that basic sessionalization and attribution in there. That I feel there's really a gap in the market for something that sort of puts it on a plate. Because I think if you do put it on a plate and you give, the state of LLMs we've got to, you give it the context. It doesn't need to be a very specialized model to go and answer some pretty interesting questions.
Totally.
And so, but yeah, so I just want to follow up on a point you're making, which is again really charming me about the so what you could do last week is very different to maybe what you can do this week. And I think a lot of people don't understand that velocity. So I see the big mistake I've even seen within our own team is that people test something, the approach doesn't work. And generally that means they dismiss it for like 6 months and they'll still go around saying, well, that doesn't work with AI, right? But if they test the same thing a few weeks later, it would actually work because the model's moved on, or it's now fast enough or cheap enough to be feasible. And there's a brilliant example of that actually at the Shopify Partner Conference last year in Toronto, where the head of product, Glenn, was up on stage saying that their live demo of their new AI tool literally it failed 4 times out of 5, and they were about to pull it from the conference until Claude launched whatever it was, 3.5 or 4, and it just worked 4 times out of 5.
Yeah,
because suddenly the model's just that much smarter that it didn't get lost. And so his point was, unless you'd actually been willing to persevere and keep testing this thing, and that's like we're averse to that as humans. Kind of, it feels dumb to keep testing something that failed.
For sure, and that goes back to the what we were discussing earlier on what's the changing role of agencies, for example. Well, one of them is being on top of all of this change for your customers, for example, because it's it's part of our job. Like, I struggle to keep up with what's going on. There's so much happening, so much changing. Every day there's a new tool. It's like, gosh, I've got like this list of 10 things I feel like I should be trying, should be using, and it's hard to get through it. And I think brands in this market that is changing so quickly, they need software tools that are going to deliver on the promise of being on the cutting edge of what's possible with their data, or for us with creative. and then folks whose job it is, whether it's internally or externally, to stay on top of what's happening, how to use it, and all of that. Because I've experienced the same thing with brands who are like, oh yeah, we tried doing this, we tried it 6 months ago, we're revisiting it now, and it's like, the cycle's monthly.
Yeah, but you say the difficult thing as a brand is you probably don't have bandwidth to test it weekly. Whereas if you have a team like Tempo, it's just that's all you're doing. Right. You do have that tempo to coin a phrase.
That was the idea.
Gotcha. So next question. So what do you think is the bigger challenge in this space? Is it the velocity of content you can produce, or the actual measurement accuracy, being able to measure that it's working?
It's a great question. And I'm curious to see if you disagree with me. I feel that the measurement accuracy problem has had a lot of investment and innovation over the last 5 to 10 years, from just data cleanliness and hygiene, to attribution approaches, to lift measurement becoming perhaps a bit more mainstream than it was. I think there's so much that's been done that most brands can get to a robust place if they want to invest in it from a measurement standpoint. And I think once you get to a certain size, I see more and more brands that are in that place, at least from an infrastructure standpoint. Then the question becomes, what do you do with the data? So I feel like measurement is a more solved problem than creative process and workflow to get the volume that is needed in this new world. That's my perspective, but you're closer to the metal on the measurement side. So.
I think the nuance is in the kind of brands of a certain scale. I think a lot of these other attribution stacks, lift studies, MMM, holdout tests, it basically requires quite a lot of scale geographically, as much as in raw spend, to be able to do those with statistical relevance. So I sort of still feel there is a problem in the mid-market that actually just don't have, and that's why I'm always sort of saying, like, the best thing is actually just to get a better signal into Meta and kind of say, and typically a better purchase signal, because all this other stuff is cool at scale, but kind of unfeasible unless you're doing like 10,000 was a day type volume.
And I do agree that you're playing that hygiene factor. I mean, we're downstream from that. Like, all of your systems are downstream from that, really. And so it is so critical, but it exists, right?
Yes.
I think it's, in a way, it's like, if you know you have the problem and seek out the solution, there are solutions, I think.
Yeah. I mean, the obvious point is you need both, right? I mean, if you just would churn out a whole load of creative, but you have no real accurate way of measuring what's working, then obviously it's like just throwing randomness.
And the other reality is, at a smaller scale, the challenge around creative volume is less. Like, sure, you're a smaller team, but it does grow with spend, obviously, and with what you're trying to do there. So, wow.
It's an interesting question. Do you feel there's sort of a certain scale you need to be to, or maybe is it about scale of spend, or maybe it's about number of SKUs, but where your platform really out, because maybe if you just have like a single SKU company and limited amount of spend, there just isn't a need to do so much creative.
I think that is right. I think, look, if you're below a certain scale, there's a need to test, but if you're only spending so much on Meta, you can only get so many at-bats, right, with tests. And so it's about being really judicious about the tests that you run and making sure those are really impactful, really different. You're testing those really basic format building blocks, and you really need to get it right. And then as you scale that spend, you just have more opportunities to test and go deeper. So I do think there are minimums where these systems begin to add real value. And I think sometimes too, smaller brands can get almost paralyzed by, oh my gosh, I should be A/B testing everything, right? And it's like, well, you could, but you're not going to get meaningful data out of that, because it's just not at that scale where that's going to be the case. And investing in doing a few things well is probably higher impact when you're starting out.
So let's get back to the measurement piece, actually, because I realized we skipped over that a little bit. So obviously, like as you said, before you even like actually putting video or content out there into the wild, you're actually doing some internal testing. So you might use AI or some human testers to figure out whether it's a good angle. But let's say you get it into production and you're actually putting ad spend behind it. How are you then? Is it about measuring using like Meta's own numbers about what's working? Is it about you trying to do some separate measurement in Google Analytics or elsewhere?
Good question. We are dependent on Meta's own numbers.
Yeah.
That was a choice we made, and you could take other approaches. But at the end of the day, the reality is Meta's numbers are what Meta itself is using to optimize what's going on from an advertising standpoint. So that's why I think it is very important that brands have a rock solid setup when it comes to CAPI and everything else to make sure that Meta has the signal that it needs. But yeah, that felt like the right scalable option. So yeah, we're using Meta, we're using Shopify, we're using the numbers right out of those. We're then doing things on the creative side, but that's what we're using as the source of truth for what is working.
Because I think this is the biggest argument against what I call sort of third-party attribution dashboards, the sort of Triple Whales, Northbeam, tools along those lines, is that although it might give you a nice warm feeling that you got it all measured, because you say the end platform can't use that signal, it's arguably a road to nowhere in the sense that what actually matters is not measurement but optimization.
Right.
And so that's always been our mantra. It's like, actually, if you was one number you want to get right, it's the number that is used to allocate the spend, not the number used to decide humanly where to allocate spend.
Yeah.
Because as you well know, the way that Meta particularly is going, but to a large extent all these ad platforms are going, is to greater dependence on the algorithm, like less settings for a PPC manager to go in and say, I want to daily sort of reallocate spend, and much more like just trust us. As long as there's a bargain there, right? Brand, as long as you're sharing me all that you know about the purchasing, I will do my best job to allocate the budget.
100%. I think that's absolutely right. I think it's a bit of this. It's almost like focusing too much on precision over kind of directionally right, and fueling a reinforcing loop. And you could spend a lot of time on precision, but to what extent does it matter? And if you're very sophisticated, like certainly something it'll matter. But
I mean, I think there is a level to it. That's the other thing we're always talking about. Is like accuracy in terms of actually kind of revenue matching versus attribution. Like, it is possible to get the revenue to match so that actually, like, we know that we're talking about the same pie.
Yeah.
The how the pie slices out, that's subjective. That's an attribution model thing, and that's like not a solvable problem. Or certainly, people get in rabbit holes trying to get accurate there.
Yeah.
Yes, obviously, you want to know more. You can attribute more of your ads to purchasing. And typically the way Meta's doing that obviously is via sort of stitching its own device graph and saying, look, even though this maybe it's happened on a different device or it's happened on a different session on that same device, like I know based on the customer logged in account that this is the same person we serve the ad to.
Yeah.
And although I'm deeply, I believe Meta particularly, but again more generally people are very greedy on like views through attribution. Ultimately, it does have an impact, like as long as you're not taking it too seriously.
It does, and I think too. Look, this is maybe my bias because I worked at Meta for many years back in the day. But I think one of the things so in addition to having some of the best ML engineers working on these things, like one of the things that made Meta's ad system really performant is that they took marketing science very seriously when I was there.
Yes,
and I don't know the extent to which people know this, but there were real like people who live and breathe like the science behind this day in, day out. If we were building new ad products, they were validated by lift studies.
Yes.
And optimization models were graded on their impact on actual lift of sales, not attributed metrics. Now that doesn't mean that things then, you're then taking that model and applying it to a whole bunch of people whose situations are different.
Sure.
Blah, 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 blah. But
But they cared about the science.
They cared about the science, and caring about the science is what enabled the ROAS to continue improving even as CPMs increased globally, like generally speaking. And those were kind of spectacular improvements in performance over time. And yes, it got more competitive, and ultimately it's a harder playground than it was 10 years ago. But anyways, I just share that because it's not a nefarious plot against you. You know what I mean? As the advertiser, and like, yeah, it's hard.
No, I can concur. I actually remember going to listen to a really, truly interesting talk at Meta's headquarters in London about 6 years ago, where, and he'd been newly recruited at that time, but, he was a proper, professor of data science, and, I mean, I'm not an expert. I mean, maybe more than some, but I wouldn't call myself a professor of that. But I was like, wow, this is serious. Like, you're not making this stuff up.
And they would have basically, to an extent, you call it like veto power over products and things. Like real business value was absolutely the North Star. So anyways, there are a lot of things that don't work well there, but I think the underlying optimization models was certainly one of them that was working.
I mean, I guess but that leads on to quite an interesting question, which is that through that, Meta has become really the primary channel for most e-commerce brands to find the audience. Obviously, they can do email marketing stuff to their existing audience, but in terms of really going out there across globally and finding the audience, it's where it's at. And I can't really see it. One of the interesting, obviously there was a phase, wasn't there, maybe a year or so ago, where Meta's share price had a wobble because there was a feeling that AI sort of undermined their model. But it doesn't feel like it does. I mean, it feels like, if anything, it reinforces them as a sort of ad channel.
Yeah. Well, they've been huge beneficiaries for many years of certain kinds of AI, right? Which can be very different than LLMs. I think there was a wobble too around like what happens to time. Really, a lot of this goes back to time spent, and are they able to continue growing that or not? And it looked like TikTok was really a threat for a while. It seems to have been mitigated. At least just based on like app leaderboards. I don't have any inside information on this and how people are spending their time, but just like they did with Snap and other threats, it seems like they've at least mitigated the risk to some extent, and people still
like they did with Snap and other threats. They basically merged in their own product, built out their own version.
Absolutely. And you see it in the feed today. If you jump into the feed, it's very different than it was 5 years ago. Right? It's a lot of random things.
Much more TikTok-y.
Much more TikTok-y, right?
Yeah.
And in that sense, they benefit from an abundance of content that is more and more personalized and niche and or effective in pulling at heartstrings or whatever emotion. That just gives them more things. Just like with the ad side, on the organic side, it gives them more things to optimize this addictive experience ultimately.
Yeah. And I think, while maybe platforms like ChatGPT are quite addictive in their own way, I can't really see them going back to that raw, share of mind, share of time spent. I can't really see it overtaking Meta anytime soon.
It seems tough to imagine, as much as perhaps you would like it to, because intellectually maybe it's a better place to spend time. But, I feel like Meta took a lot of time out of television and not out of. It's hard to imagine something that's like an encyclopedia coming in and stealing that.
Yeah, 100%, and arguably is a more satisfying experience spending your time chatting to humans than agents. Okay, so I guess again, to a more sort of philosophical question. I mean, okay, so you're in the business of helping brands harness AI to make ads, and obviously all brands want to make ads. So where does this end? Does it become a war where everyone is using AI to create infinite volumes of creative, and how does that pan out, do you think?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I think yes, everyone ends up using AI-driven creative systems as part of their workflows. Inevitable. And I think the volume thing is really interesting, because I'm going to make kind of a point that there's two sides to this. All else being equal, most advertisers out there are probably not creating as many ads, testing as many things as they should.
Sure.
Right?
Because it takes time and it's hard.
And it's hard and all of the rest. So most brands and advertisers should probably be doing a higher volume than they have been doing to date. On the flip side, that doesn't mean that the right volume is infinite for all of these brands, right? And we're already seeing that, I think. The folks who are on the cutting edge of like the volume game have already reached the limits of how much you need. And Meta is already communicating what those limits are. And for example, like, don't give us 20 versions of exactly the same thing. Like, we're treating that as one, right? In behind the scenes in our system. They're already communicating.
20 versions in like a slightly different variant, the coloring or the brightness
like
or something.
If you squint at it and it looks the same, like, all right, fine. Like, there's limits. We just don't need that many of those. We need more distinct concepts to optimize between. And so I think where the edge is going to exist over the next, call it 18 to 24 months, I think it's impossible to predict further out than that. Let's call it 24 months.
Yeah.
It's about, well, what are the tests that are going to be highest impact? And infusing that creative process with data to create the right things that are worth testing. Because the number is not infinite. It's probably more than what you've been doing, unless you're kind of ahead of the curve, but it's not infinite. And so, I think that's.
But going back to your point about, obviously, as I say, we're very recently into the level which an AI created commercial of video, short form video could be anywhere near production quality. But again, in that same sort of horizon over the next couple of years, do you think there will be some brands who are like, we're doing like production the expensive old way and it's going to look better and therefore going to win on just production quality? Or do you think within 2 years, like, production quality of completely AI generated stuff will just be indecipherable?
Yeah.
That's the word. You get it. Indiscernible.
Indiscernible, yeah. I think it largely will be, but you still have directors who insist on using film for
correct.
Film,
Yeah.
Digital.
Yeah.
And it's hard to make
because it just looks a certain way.
It feels a certain way.
Yeah.
And I think as good as, an AI actor is going to be, like, I think it'll be pretty darn near perfect in some ways, but not in others. And so I think we will see brands lean into, the other side of this, right? It's kind of like how luxury brands have usually rejected any, like, try the e-commerce experience of a true luxury brand. It's often like, what in the world is going on here, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, we're different by design.
Yes.
And I 100% believe there will be folks who do that, who succeed by that playbook.
Yes. Yeah, I can see creative directors saying, look, it's okay to use AI in the ideation phase, but fundamentally as a brand, we stand for this sort of retro or quality life or something that's not artificial, and therefore, in terms of the content we put out, we want that to be authentically us.
And I just think it's going to be a smaller number of brands for whom that really matters, because I think it's intrinsic to their positioning and what they are as a brand and all of that. And I think it's always going to be this tension that exists between how do we do something differently than what everyone is doing in order.
Of course, there's always reactionaries.
Exactly, yeah.
And with the kind of volume thing, do you think that, I mean, again, from your experiment so far, do the better results come from being able to like make a lot of different iterations of like a hero product or kind of main product category, or is actually the benefit from maybe going more hyper segmented and having more different creative for different uses and audiences and products?
Yeah, I think it is more around segmentation in this, and that cuts in a few ways. I mean, segmentation by message, right, is one of those things. Like, what's the point that you're making? It's by sort of persona or who you're reaching, by virtue of how different it is aesthetically or on any number of traits. It's also for some brands that have larger catalogs. It's actually being able to market more of the products in the catalog in an effective and complete way than you could before, right? And that can be very impactful. I mean, obviously we've had DPA for ages now, and that's extremely effective for large catalog brands, but it's kind of how do how do you?
But
kind of
yeah,
expand
but
that
basically,
concept, right?
Yeah, dynamic video ads to that level is quite interesting.
Totally.
So if you have even 1,000 SKUs, you can have a video of your type of persona using that type of product. You can imagine that might be quite impactful.
Yeah, or even within a seasonal collection, brands will often triage like, all right, well, what gets the hero treatment, right? And if you can give everything the hero treatment, well, maybe certain things pop in a way that you just couldn't anticipate that they would, right? Or maybe they do better on certain platforms, and before they just weren't given that opportunity. It was a PDP, and it was on in the corner of like the main shoot that you did, and now it can have its sort of moment, so to speak.
It actually makes me think that this might actually have big impacts even for sort of merchandising, that a lot of brands would previously have chosen way before they started advertising something what they thought was going to sell. But if it becomes trivial to kind of launch 1,000 different products with 1,000 different ads, maybe you launch them all and you see which one, as you say, resonates and gets traction.
Yeah, I think you can try a lot more of that. There's
because before, as you say, it was simply infeasible because there was a real cost to not just building creative, but all the planning around marketing that thing. So you would have to say, as you say, early on in the creative process, you'd have to throw some designs out of the drawing board because they were just, you didn't think they were going to be winners. But hey, maybe they are, and try it.
And maybe in the new world that I'm going to make a really obtuse, like this is going to be a bit silly, but like there is a market for like the leopard print version of whatever, right? And so like maybe in this new world you can always have kind of full campaign support on that sideline with the print or the whatever that's got this niche audience. It's not your core, and it doesn't serve that purpose. Sometimes strange products just work and get people to the site, and they buy more other things. But yeah, maybe you can have these more narrow segments of your potential market marketed to more fully and aggressively and continuously. I'll put it that way, if that makes sense. Over time.
Yeah, and just see what wins, see what resonates, and maybe different markets, different things. Yeah. Final question. So you mentioned at the beginning, obviously you've chosen to focus on the ads use case. I mean, I get all startups need to kind of go deep on one thing, and it makes sense to your meta background. Do you think conceptually you can apply this same stuff to other marketing channels, to email or?
I think so. And tellingly, we started from the beginning, we were trying to do email and ads, and we went quite far down some different roads in email. And ultimately ads is where I think there's just the biggest pain point around volume specifically.
I think there's the biggest pain point. It's the biggest spend. It's the biggest cost item.
Exactly. And so it was at a certain point, it's like, all right, we need to focus in, and that's what we're focusing on.
Yeah.
But I think the same principle applies. I mean, in email, an interesting example is everyone wants to be personalizing email more, right? Well, what does that mean? Like, how do you actually do that at scale? I think that's a really obvious use case. You could have, and not saying necessarily we would power this, but like very differentiated flows for different groups of flows that evolve over time based on how your catalog has evolved and seasonality.
Yeah.
In a way that you just couldn't commit the resources to doing that before. Where it's like, okay, well, now it's a bit Christmassy, and there's these products in the footer and this and that. Those having these things evolve continuously becomes possible.
I mean, it's something we're struggling with, because I think where our Klaviyo integration is going is to to be able to push in more different data points. I mean, more sort of different permutation of flows, but then the bottleneck I think becomes sort of basically sort of complexity paralysis for anyone going in there and trying to figure out how the plumbing all works. It gets very complicated, and you come down to this age-old thing with personalization, where is it better to just do the basic thing right or do the complex hyper-personalized thing wrong?
Totally, and that is and I think that's where you can only do the complex with the help of machines to do it for you.
Yeah.
Because you otherwise are just going to trip over yourself.
100%.
And the reality is, like, there are declining returns to adding complexity, right? And so it can be a right answer of like, it's just not worth it for me to do that, right? To run that A/B test. That is a fair response. There's different things you can be doing with your time. But if a machine's doing it, well, it's like, yeah, why not, right? Just test everything.
And actually, I saw a post by an email marketing agent exactly this, saying like, if you set up all of your 50 flows with AI, the brilliant thing is there are no custom-based errors. The kind of errors it will make are quite systemic, like also by the systematic.
Yeah.
Like they'll make across all the campaigns, so you can go and edit them. Whereas, the real problem with human error is it's likely to be of a kind of just a focus problem where one thing gets mistyped or.
And another thing, and I don't think we've pushed far enough into this, but you can also use AI to check all of those.
Of course.
Continuously.
Yes.
Right? Because maybe a link on the site changes, like have it run through everything.
Yeah.
You can check everything. Right?
I agree. AI audit being a great use case. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you very much. It's been an interesting chat. And good luck with growing Tempo.
Thank you so much.